They say the road gives you time to think. It's true. 22 years behind the wheel of a semi, you learn to measure your life by exits and truck stop coffee. My name's Marcus Hale. I'm 44 years old, and I've hauled freight through every state west of the Mississippi. It's not glamorous, no beach houses, no fancy vacations, but it paid the bills, kept food on the table and gas in the tank, and it gave Lila the kind of life she said she wanted. We'd been married 15 years. No kids, just the two of us and a house in Sioux Falls. When I was home, we had quiet dinners. She worked an office job, something with marketing. I never really got the details. Most of the time, we talked in passing. 15 years of how was your day, and I'll be home Thursday if weather's good. That's how it goes when one of you lives on the road. I'd been ignoring the tightness in my chest for weeks. Thought it was just bad posture or the usual truck stop diet catching up with me. You learn to power through discomfort. That's part of the job. But somewhere outside of North Platte, Nebraska, the pain got sharp. Not like a cramp, like something was being squeezed from the inside. I had to pull over, parked just off the shoulder and called 911 myself, trying not to sound panicked. They airlifted me to a hospital in Sioux Falls. I barely remember the helicopter. I remember the paramedic's eyes, calm and focused, and the doctor's voice before I blacked out. "We're losing him," she said. Just like that. Flat. No drama, no music swelling. Just 3 words and darkness. When I woke up, 2 days had passed. I had tubes in my arms, a heart monitor beeping beside me, and the kind of ache in my chest that tells you something serious just happened. The nurse said I'd flatlined, twice. They put a stent in. I was lucky, she said. I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow, like the engine was still running, but the cargo was gone. They let me have my phone the next morning. No missed calls, no voicemails, just one unread message from Lila. It was a screenshot of our joint checking account. Balance, 0.00 underneath. She'd written, "I deserve this after everything I've done for you." I stared at it for a long time. $61,000. That was my emergency fund. The maintenance reserve for my truck. Retirement savings I'd built slow and steady across hundreds of thousands of miles. She took it all while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. I didn't text back some long message. Didn't ask why. Didn't beg. I sent her a single thumbs-up emoji and locked the screen. You'd think I'd be furious. Maybe if it had happened a year ago, I would have been. But that morning, all I felt was empty. Not the kind of empty that gets filled with sleep or food, a deeper one. Like I'd finally reached the end of something and couldn't even find the energy to mourn it. When the doctor came in, he said I'd need to rest, no stress, no driving for at least 6 weeks. He asked if someone would be picking me up the next day. Yeah, I lied. That night, as the hallway lights dimmed and the nurses made their rounds, I stared up at the ceiling tiles and made a decision. I wasn't going home. I picked up the phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Not because of a fight. We just lived different lives. "Nate," I said when he answered. There was a pause then. "Name it." "I need a place to crash for a few days," I said. "And I need you not to tell Lila." Another pause. Then, "She doesn't know you're alive?" "Oh, she knows," I said. "She just doesn't know. I'm not coming back." Nate lived on the edge of town. In a 3-bedroom house he built himself after his second divorce. He worked construction, local foreman gigs mostly, and liked things simple. Meat on the grill, beer in the fridge, and nothing on the walls except a mounted deer head and a dusty photo of our dad holding a fish. We hadn't talked in months. No fight, just time. Life. But when he picked me up from the hospital, he didn't ask questions, just helped me into the passenger seat, tossed my overnight bag in the back and said, "You good?" I nodded. We drove in silence for most of the ride. Inside, the house smelled like sawdust and grilled onions. Familiar, earthy, safe. He pointed toward the guest room. "Sheets are clean. Bathrooms down the hall. Want something to eat?" I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. My stomach was quiet. Too quiet, like it knew my mind was too full to focus on anything else. Maybe later, I said. I lay down on the bed, but sleep didn't come. Just memories, most of them blurred by time, but some so sharp they hurt. Lila and I met outside a gas station in Cheyenne. She was stuck with a flat tire standing beside her car in heels that didn't belong on gravel. I pulled in for fuel, saw her struggling with the jack and stepped in. 10 minutes later, the tire was changed, and she was thanking me like I'd just rescued her from a burning building. Funny how that works. What feels like heroism at the start becomes just expected later. That moment became the foundation of our story. She loved how capable I was, how steady. I thought she was beautiful and smart and a little chaotic in a way that made me feel needed. We got married 6 months later. Quick, sure, but it didn't feel reckless. I was 29, she was 26. Old enough to know what we were doing. Young enough to believe it would last. For a while, it worked. She hated how much I traveled, but loved the house, the stability, the credit card with no balance. I'd call every night from truck stops or motel rooms, and she'd tell me about her day, coworkers, annoying emails, yoga class. Sometimes we'd talk for an hour, then 20 minutes, then 5. Last couple years, it was mostly texts. Made it to Amarillo. All good here. Be home Friday. I should have noticed sooner. She stopped asking when I'd be home. Started taking weekend trips with friends I'd never met. I asked once casually, "Who's Anna again?" She just said, "Oh, someone from the gym." The topic changed. I didn't press, because that's what trust is, right? I thought it was trust. Looking back, maybe it was just neglect. From the kitchen, I heard Nate rustling around, the clink of a plate, the hum of the fridge, then his footsteps outside the door. He knocked lightly. "You sure you don't want anything? I've got leftover. Brisket." I sat up, opened the door, and followed him to the kitchen. "I'll take a little," I said. "Thanks." He fixed me a plate and slid it over. I stared at it, fork in hand. Didn't taste a thing. "She took everything?" he asked, his tone low and careful. I nodded. "What are you gonna do?" I took a slow breath. "Rest. Doctor's orders." He looked at me, waiting but didn't push. What I didn't say out loud was, I wasn't sure yet, but I was already taking mental inventory. 3 months earlier, I refinanced the house. Lila had said she was slammed with meetings, so I handled it myself. Put it in just my name. My credit was better anyway. She never even asked to see the paperwork, not once. And then there was the medical power of attorney. My niece Emily helped me with it after my buddy Darren had a stroke and his girlfriend couldn't make decisions for him. That scared me. Emily was in her 2nd year of law school and sharp as hell. She walked me through it all, dotted every I, crossed every T. I had protections. Maybe not enough. But more than she knew. Later that night, back in the guest room, I lay flat on the bed, eyes open, counting the spaces between the ceiling tiles. She changed her passwords, started taking her phone into the bathroom, moved money between accounts. For better interest. God, how blind had I been, and why wasn't I angrier? It was day 3 at Nate's when I got the text. Harold, next door. "Hey man, everything okay? Haven't seen you around. There's been some guy at your place. Not just visiting either. Thought you should know." Stared at the message for a long time. Didn't respond, didn't forward it, just let it sink in. Some guy. Not a friend. Not a plumber or delivery person. Some guy. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was a kind of stillness. Like when your truck hydroplanes and time stretches. You know what's about to happen, and there's no stopping it, you just brace. That afternoon, Nate drove me downtown. I told him I needed to stop at a bank, not the one Lila and I used. We went to the main branch, where no one knew our names, or asked if we wanted a lollipop for being loyal customers. At the counter, I asked to speak with a fraud specialist. They brought me into a glass-walled office. A woman in a navy blazer with sharp eyes and a neutral smile offered me a seat. I explained what happened. The heart attack, the hospital stay, the screenshot, the missing $61,000. She listened. didn't interrupt. Her fingers tapped the keyboard slowly. "Mr. Hale," she said after a moment, "we can initiate a fraud investigation. But I should be honest with you, joint accounts are tricky. Your wife had equal access." "I understand," I said, "but I'd still like to try." She nodded. "We'll need documentation, proof of your hospitalization when you were incapacitated. If this turns criminal, law enforcement may get involved." I met her eyes. "That's fine." On the drive back, Nate stopped for gas. I stayed in the car, watched a dad wrangling two kids into a convenience store, each one clutching a dollar bill for ice cream. Life kept moving, like none of this mattered. At Nate's, I pulled out my notebook and made 3 calls. First, to my dispatcher. Told him I needed extended medical leave. "No problem," he said. "Just get better." Second, to the credit union where I kept a small business account for independent hauling gigs, separate from the joint account and, thankfully, untouched. Third, to Eric, Nate's lawyer friend. We'd only spoken once at a barbecue a few years back, but he remembered me. "Eric, I need to know where I stand," I said. "With the house, with the money, with everything." "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "Bring documents. We'll take it one piece at a time." After the calls, I opened my laptop, logged into 2 investment accounts I'd set up over the years. Nothing major, but slow build stuff, dividends, trucking stock, a conservative mutual fund. She'd never asked about any of it, not once. Not because I was hiding anything. She just never cared about the boring parts. The money was still there, intact, a small win, but it gave me just enough air to breathe. Then my phone buzzed. "Lila, where are you? Your truck's not at the depot. Did they tell you I came by?" A minute later, "Marcus, this is ridiculous. You can't just disappear. We need to talk about this." I stared at the messages, thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't reply. Nate walked in from the garage, wiping grease off his hands. "She reaching out?" "Yeah." "You gonna respond?" I closed the laptop. "Not yet." That night, I went for a walk around the block. It was quiet. No dogs barking, no kids screaming, just the hum of porch lights and the rustle of dry leaves. I looked up. The sky was clear, stars visible even with the city glow. And for the first time since collapsing on that highway shoulder, my chest didn't hurt, not physically anyway. That's when it hit me. Lila didn't just steal money. She didn't just betray trust. She gave me something back. I hadn't had control in years. Not really. I'd been grinding gears and hauling loads while she quietly shifted the power in our marriage, emotionally, financially, even physically. But now it was my turn to drive. Eric showed up the next morning with a legal pad, a leather briefcase, and eyes like he'd already started the chess match in his head. We sat at Nate's kitchen table, coffee. Between us, papers spread out like a blueprint for battle. "Let's start with the basics," he said. "The house refinanced 3 months ago solely in your name, correct?" "Right. She didn't want to deal with the paperwork." "Good. That gives us a foothold. You've also got a medical power of attorney, yes?" "Signed and notarized. My niece helped with it last year." "Even better," he said, tapping his pen. "Hospital records prove you were incapacitated. That gives us a strong claim that the withdrawal of funds happened when you were legally unable to consent. That can be argued as financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." I nodded. "And if she says it was marital money?" "She will. But we can prove that nearly all the deposits came from your income, your pay stubs, direct transfers. That's leverage." I exhaled slower than I meant to. "She hired a lawyer." He looked up. "Who?" "Marissa Lowell." Eric blinked once. "Of course she did. You know her?" "Oh yeah, she's a hammer, goes for full asset division. Known for painting husbands as abusive or unstable if it fits her narrative. She's already claiming I abandoned the marriage." Eric gave a dry smile. "Let her. You were recovering from a near-fatal cardiac event. We'll get that in front of a judge immediately. I'll file for an emergency hearing to freeze any assets she hasn't moved yet." That afternoon, the paperwork was in motion. The next day, I was sitting in Nate's living room watching a rerun of some home renovation show. 2 people arguing about tile colors like it mattered. when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Peeked through the curtain. Lila. She rang the doorbell 3 times, then started knocking. Hard. Marcus, I know you're in there. Your truck's down the street. We need to talk. I stayed frozen on the couch. Not out of fear, just resolve. I was done playing defense. After a minute, the knocking stopped. The car door slammed. Tires chirped. Silence. Again, a few hours later, I got a new text. Lila. I'm sorry about the money. I was angry. You've been distant for months. I thought you were cheating. I found out about the refinance and panicked. We can work this out. Please talk to me. The first time she ever accused me of cheating, after years of me calling nightly. From rest stops, texting when I hit every major city, driving myself sick to keep her life comfortable. Projection, most likely. I turned the phone face down on the table. Nate walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. That her again? Yeah, what's she saying? Backpedaling. He raised an eyebrow. You gonna bite? I shook my head. Nope. Later that evening, Eric called. Just got word, she's fully lawyering up. Lowell filed an aggressive pre-motion packet. What's that mean? It means they're setting the tone. She's not bluffing. They're going after everything. House, retirement, maybe even future earnings. They're trying to paint you as emotionally unstable. Because I had a heart attack? Because you disappeared after a heart attack, Eric said. They'll say you ghosted her, left her frightened, emotionally abandoned. Lowell loves that angle. I leaned against the counter and let that sink in. So what now? Now, Eric said. We get ahead of this. He paused, then added, she's playing hardball. Yeah. He continued, cool and calm. We're going to play smarter. Section 5, draft, 795 words. A week later, Emily came by Nate's place with her laptop and a nervous smile. She was clutching a manila folder and tapping her foot like she'd had 3 too many coffees. I found something, she said, sliding the folder across the table. Inside was a printout of a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. It was under Lila's name. Opened 18 months ago. Account balance 118th and 342.19. I felt my pulse slow, not spike, slow, like my body needed time to process it. Emily continued, look at the deposit pattern. She pointed at the lines. Deposits came in every few weeks, always just under $10,000. Like clockwork. Just under the reporting threshold, Eric said, peering over my shoulder. Classic move to avoid attention. Structuring deposits to fly below the radar, Emily. Click to the next page. I mapped the dates. They line up with your long-haul runs. Every time you were gone for a stretch, a new deposit hit. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. She's been planning this. Eric nodded. Not just planning to run. Planning for the day you might walk away. She's been building a financial parachute behind your back. She thought I'd leave? I think, Eric said slowly. She didn't want to get caught unprepared. But it turned into something more. You had the income, but she took control. I felt it then. Sharp, clear, unforgiving. Not grief, not confusion. Betrayal. Focused and clean. Emily hesitated, then pulled out another sheet. There's more. A credit card statement. Hotel charge from a downtown Minneapolis. Boutique hotel, 3 months ago. Under a name that punched the air out of my lungs. Gavin Rhodes, our neighbor. The same guy who'd texted me like a friend. Like a guy looking out for me. The charge was made while I was in Seattle that week. He was the guy Harold mentioned. I said quietly. Eric's brow furrowed. Who? Our neighbor, I said. He was checking in on me. Sent me a message when he saw someone else at the house. That was him. That was Gavin. Emily sat back in her chair, disgust clear on her face. They were in this together, she said. Playing both sides. Eric rubbed his jaw. We need to move fast. Why? I asked, even though I already knew. Because if they've been smart enough to hide a side account this long, they're probably smart enough to run. I stood up, my chest tightened. Not from the heart this time, but from what I was about to say. What's our next move? Eric met my eyes and, for the first time since this mess began, smiled. We make them regret ever thinking they could get away with it. 2 days after finding Gavin's name on that hotel receipt, I drove by the house. I didn't go inside. Didn't need to. Instead, I walked the edge of the property, snapping photos on my phone, new retaining wall, the fancy landscaping that showed up while I was in California for 3 weeks last spring, and the shed Gavin built as a favor. All of it paid for with my money. I sent the photos to Eric with a short message. Documented. An hour later he called. "This is good," he said. "It shows misuse of marital funds to improve a property you own. That strengthens your equity." Argument. The next day, Eric got a call from Marissa Lowell, Lila's attorney. She had a proposal. Lila would return half of the withdrawn money, about $30,000, in exchange for 50% equity in the house. I didn't even need to ask. "They're testing you," Eric said. "Seeing if you'll panic, settle cheap, let it go. And we don't bite." "Correct," he said. "We let them sweat." While they were trying to bluff, I made my own move. I called HR at my trucking company, asked about the disability insurance I'd been paying into for 2 decades, explained my cardiac event and the doctor's orders to avoid driving for the foreseeable future. "You qualify," the rep said. 60% of your salary for up to a year. I filed the paperwork that afternoon. Another income stream, one they didn't know existed and wouldn't be factored into any pending settlement. Later that week, Nate and I drove past Gavin's house again. There was a sign on the lawn, "For sale, by owner." "He's cutting and running," Nate said. "Yeah," I said, but not before clearing out. Emily confirmed it the next morning. She'd been watching the account movement at her credit union internship. "Gavin's liquidating," she said. 90 grand withdrawn in cashier's checks 2 days ago. I sat back, heart steady, mind moving fast. I called Eric immediately. "They're getting ready to bolt." He didn't hesitate. "I'll file for an emergency injunction first. Thing tomorrow. We'll freeze all known assets, including Gavin's, if we can prove the connection." That night, just after 10:30, my phone buzzed. "Lila. We need to talk, just you and me, no lawyers." I stared at it, then slid the screen left and hit forward. To Eric, message. "Just came in." He replied in under a minute. "Eric, don't respond. Injunction hearing is at 2 p.m. tomorrow." I looked at the message again, not a trace of remorse. Just an attempt to salvage whatever plan they thought they could still control. They wanted to talk now, because they knew time was running out. Good. I got to the courthouse 30 minutes early, pulled into the far end of the parking lot, shut off the engine, and just sat there, breathing steady. Watching people walk in and out like it was any other Tuesday. Then I saw them, Lila and Gavin, together. They were parked 2 rows ahead, standing outside his black Audi. She was animated, waving her arms, clearly angry. He leaned in close, his hand brushing her arm. It wasn't just 2 people talking, it was personal, familiar. They didn't see me. I lifted my phone and hit record. 30 seconds. No sound, just body language. But it was enough. Inside, Eric was already waiting near the courtroom door. "Judge Harmon's presiding," he said. "Old school. Hates anything that smells like deception." I handed him my phone. "You'll like this then." He watched the clip once, nodded slowly, and slipped the phone into his suit pocket. Perfect timing. Courtroom was quiet. Just us, the lawyers, the judge, and Lila. Gavin wasn't allowed in. He wasn't part of the divorce proceedings. Marissa. Lowell, her attorney, looked like she'd walked out of a high-stakes poker game. Impeccable suit, 0 expression. Judge Harmon was older, white hair, reading glasses low on his nose. He looked over the filings without a word, flipping pages, brow furrowed. Then, "Ms. Lowell," he said, "your client withdrew the entirety of the joint marital accounts while Mr. Hale was hospitalized for a life-threatening cardiac event. Is that correct?" Lowell stood. "Your Honor, my client had legal access to those funds. Furthermore, Mr. Hale recently refinanced their home without informing Mrs. Hale, which we argue was a deceptive act." I'm not asking about the house, the judge said flatly. I'm asking about the timing of the withdrawals. Was your client aware that Mr. Hale was in the hospital when she emptied the accounts? Lowell hesitated. Lila leaned over and whispered something. Then, yes, Your Honor, but she was under emotional distress. She feared the marriage was ending and acted to protect herself financially. The judge removed his glasses. While her husband was unconscious from a heart attack? Silence. I'd like to enter video evidence, Your Honor, Eric said, standing up. Footage recorded this morning, showing Mrs. Hale and a Mr. Gavin Rhodes, her alleged concerned neighbor, engaged in what appears to be a romantically intimate confrontation. Lowell started to object, but the judge waved it off. Eric played the video from my phone. No sound. Just Lila and Gavin facing each other in the lot, his hand on her waist at one point, her head shaking. Their closeness said more than words ever could. Judge Harmon looked up. Ms. Lowell, would you care to explain why your client has until now denied any personal relationship with Mr. Rhodes? Lowell straightened. Your Honor, the nature of that relationship is not materially relevant. It is, the judge cut in. When one party is accused of financial manipulation and the other is helping them move money. He turned to Lila. Mrs. Hale, are you planning to leave the state with Mr. Rhodes? She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, I don't know. Let me rephrase, the judge said. The court has reason to believe you and Mr. Rhodes have been transferring assets, liquidating funds, and planning to flee this jurisdiction while your husband was recovering from cardiac trauma. He turned to both attorneys. I'm issuing an immediate freeze on all financial accounts belonging to Dana Hale and Gavin Rhodes. Neither party may leave the county without court approval. He paused. Furthermore, given Mr. Hale's medical condition and the evidence of exploitation, I'm granting temporary exclusive use of the marital home to Mr. Hale. Marissa Lowell started to object again, but the judge raised his hand. This court takes advantage of a medically vulnerable spouse very seriously, counselor. You're lucky I'm not recommending criminal charges. He banged the gavel. Adjourned. Outside, I walked past Lila without saying a word. Marcus, please, she said softly, trying to reach for my arm. Marissa stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. I didn't even glance at her. On the steps, Eric grinned like he'd just won a playoff game. This is just the beginning, he said. Now we start discovery. 3 months after the injunction hearing, the divorce was finalized. It moved faster than anyone expected. Maybe Lila knew the tide had turned. Maybe Gavin skipping town forced her to face the fallout alone. Either way, she didn't fight. The judge signed the decree quietly. No drama, just signatures and silence. I got the house, the truck, 80% of our joint savings. She kept her car and 20%. But from her share, she had to pay my legal fees. Every bill, every motion, every hour of Eric's time came out of her pocket. As for the secret account, that one was split 50-50. But only after tax penalties and fraud-related deductions. Eric pushed through with help from the credit union. Gavin vanished. He didn't show up to court. Didn't sign a single paper. Last we heard, he'd sold his house and cashed out. No forwarding address, no social media. Just gone. Lila moved to Minneapolis. I didn't ask where, didn't care. She was someone else's ghost to deal with now. As for me, I sold the house 6 months later. Too many memories in those walls. I bought a smaller place closer to Nate and Emily. Clean, quiet, easy to keep up with. I used part of the settlement to help Emily with her law school tuition. She hadn't asked. But when I handed her the check, her eyes filled before she could speak. You're going to make one hell of an attorney, I said. Just don't forget to charge double if you ever take on a case like mine. We both laughed. I don't drive long haul anymore. My heart can't take the stress, and truthfully, neither can I. I work dispatch now, steady hours, home every night. I get to sleep in my own bed, cook my own meals, and see the people I care about more than once a month. It's quieter than the road. But there's something to be said for quiet. Sometimes people ask if I'm angry. About the money, the lies, the affair. I'm not. Not anymore. Anger is fuel when you need to survive. But once you've made it through the fire, it just burns. What's left? Lila thought she was taking everything from me that day in the hospital. Thought that draining our accounts would leave me broken, helpless. What she didn't realize was, she gave me something in return. A clean break. A chance to stop surviving and start rebuilding. A push I probably would have never taken on my own. Last week, I was unpacking a box in the garage, just sorting old paperwork, receipts, stuff I probably should have tossed years ago. At the bottom, I found our wedding album, still in its white sleeve. A little dusty but intact. I sat on the edge of a folding chair and flipped through it. There we were, me in a suit that didn't quite fit, her in a dress that sparkled in the sun. We were smiling, real smiles. Young, hopeful, blind as bats. Thought about throwing it out, but I didn't. I slid it back into the box, closed the lid, and wrote "past" in thick black marker across the top. That's what it is now. Not shame, not pain, just part of the story. The heart attack nearly killed me, the betrayal nearly broke me. But I'm still here. Changed? Definitely. Wiser? Hopefully. Stronger, without a doubt. Because some lessons you only learn the hard way. Some people you only lose for good reason. And sometimes, when the dust finally settles, the life you rebuild is better than the one you lost.